good evening. I'm Alexandra Büchler. I've just been introduced, and it is a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for coming to listen to us. And before we start, I'd like to thank the Kerala Literature Festival for inviting us, and the Wales Wales Arts International, an organization that has made it possible for us to be here, and also is it the European Union that we are thanking for? Yes, for Lukas's presence. And this has to do with the fact that he was shortlisted for the European Union Literature Prize, which is a very high-ranking award. The speakers have been introduced, so we can start. And the title of the session is quite intriguing. And at the same time, it gives us the possibility to talk about the author's own work, but also of their experience of the kind of wider world and circumstances. Power and revolution, that's quite a big topic. Also, European imagination, how that has been reflected in European imagination. Well, maybe that's where we start. We all come from relatively small places. I myself am Czech. I was born in Prague. We share with Lukas some revolutions because he is Slovak, and our two countries used to be one. And then we have Angharad Prize and Francesca Reece, who are from Wales. And as you probably know, Wales is part of the United Kingdom, but it's quite a separate place. It's a separate country with its distinctive culture and two languages. So it is officially a bilingual country. Welsh is spoken there as well as English. So Angharad is someone who writes in Welsh, and she is also professor of Welsh at Bangor University and teaches creative writing. She's also a translator. And Francesca writes in English, but her second book is very firmly set in Wales, and both her books are fascinating. But that one particularly deals with issues that are very much felt by the Welsh people. So my first question to the speakers would be, what were the revolutions, or the one revolution that they either have experienced themselves or that has impacted their life and their writing, perhaps? And maybe I'll start with Lukas.
Yeah, so it was like 27 years ago, and this revolution is almost forgotten, we have to say, and our country is looking for its new dark age, I have to say. So it's very sad, actually. And maybe what is interesting for me personally is my personal revolution, since you told me that I can speak about personal revolution too. Like 5 years ago, I had something like social phobia. I was absolutely introverted, and when my first book was published, I refused to be present on the launch of the book, and I present every event and so on. And now I'm here on the beach in Kerala and speaking here with my poor English. And there's a big revolution for me. Yeah.
Thank you. I should also say that what we're really trying to do, and this is what I meant by stressing that we all come from rather small places, is that our organization, Literature Across Frontiers, really aims to give opportunities, give voice to people who either write or authors who write in languages that are spoken by fewer speakers. And as the famous Icelandic author called Sean puts it, we never talk about small languages. We really need to talk about languages that are spoken by just a small number of people. But also when he came here to India, he kept saying to the audiences, you don't understand small numbers because your languages are spoken by so many people, by millions, whereas in hundreds of millions, sometimes hundreds of thousands, definitely, but we are speakers of really small languages. So Czech is spoken by about 10 million people, Slovak by about...
Slovakia, 5 million.
Yeah, 5 million, and Welsh by 500,000. And then we have English, which is the lingua franca, the global language that makes it possible for us to understand each other. And Francesca writes in English, but again, I feel often that writers from Wales are kind of in the shadow of writers who use the same language, but they are writers who, are located in the US, you are in London, but then you write about Wales. And as Welsh authors are sometimes advised, they shouldn't be writing about Wales, they should be writing about other places because Wales is not interesting. So tell me, Angharad and Francesca, could you tell us about your revolutions that have...
So I've been thinking about this question. Obviously, as a woman in my mid-30s who grew up in the UK, I haven't lived through what you might traditionally see as a revolution, but I was kind of racking my brains, thinking what I could bring up. And two things kind of came to me. The first, and I think most obvious one, is, I guess, the tech revolution, which I think is comparable to the Industrial Revolution. We're obviously living through it. We're sort of right in the midst of it at the moment. So it's kind of difficult to judge the sort of repercussions, the larger repercussions on our culture, on language, on literature, on all the things that we're sort of interested and invested in. I kind of actually feel like we're only just starting to come to terms with it now, especially if you look at it through the lens of the literary world. I know that in the British, having already just talked about the importance of Welsh literature, I'm now breaking out into the United Kingdom generally. But in that publishing world, we talk a lot about how the tech revolution is kind of really damaging people's capacity for concentration and sort of stamina when you're taking in information, which is obviously required in the reading of novels. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Although it's not so much a political revolution, it's very much that I feel one that I'm living through at the moment and still kind of, none of us really know how to come to terms with it yet. I think we've all been embracing the advantages, and now that everyone's sort of becoming preoccupied with AI, these kind of things, the disadvantages are making themselves, they're becoming more manifest, more evident. And then the other one I thought of was a more sort of explicitly negative one, which is that the country that I grew up in, and again, I'm talking about the United Kingdom at large rather than just specifically Wales, was one that kind of seemed to be gearing towards some sort of progression, even if it was a superficial progression that didn't really have a substantial base. And now in the last sort of 10 years, especially since Brexit, there's been this really horrifying revolution of, I mean, it's sort of a revolution, but it's also so regressive, of people returning to kind of openly expressing very backwards views, and that kind of taking hold in the conversation. You know, I'm even thinking about just something that's always been in my life, which is the BBC News, kind of listening over the last 2 years especially, how these kind of quite flagrantly racist views are just being platformed without being questioned, because there's this kind of idea that we have to platform all the views. Yeah, so those are the two revolutions that kind of came to me. They're not necessarily the traditional thing you would associate with revolution, and neither are, I mean, I suppose tech is sort of hopeful. The tech revolution has the capacity for hope, but the political revolution, more regression, is quite a depressing one, I think. So, yeah.
Thank you. I was too nervous to say this yesterday, but I would just like to say what a pleasure it is to be here at your amazing festival. and how privileged and honoured I feel to be here. It's been such an inspiration, such a wonderful event. So I need to get that out of the way to begin with. These big questions of power, revolution, European identity or imagination, these are very big matters to be dealing with, especially perhaps from a small or minority perspective. I think basically in the modern era, we've realized that power is not some divine right. It's something that people can win or lose. You can fight for power, and in the same way, you can lose power. And I think that's what literature does very well. It shows us this battle for power. It shows us who has power, who doesn't have power. What does power do to the mind? What does power or lack of power do to the imagination or the literary imagination? Speaking personally, I was a student of European literature, German literature especially, and I was studying at the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall. So, I literally saw before my eyes this political revolution, which has affected Lukas perhaps more than me, but I witnessed this happening. Looking back over the classics of European literature, I suddenly realized that all the authors I enjoyed and admired had been writing at times of revolution. So you've got the German Romantics, writing at the time of the French Revolution. Then you have all the 19th century writers writing in the age of revolution after the Napoleonic Wars, including Karl Marx himself. The creator of a revolution was also writing at a time of revolutions, and he is a fascinating writer himself and a very relevant thinker today, in my opinion. Then in the 20th century, Kafka, writing at the time of the Russian Revolution, the First World War, the same way Virginia Woolf. And later, we have psychological or social revolutions like feminism or the civil rights movement. And for me, it is these writers who look at the way power shifts from side to side, or what power does to people, what power does to people's imaginations. That, for me, makes the most exciting literature. Finally, I think from Wales, we've always been in the shadow of England. And in a way, I felt that being in the shadow or in the sidelines or on the periphery in that way has kept us away from revolution. But we have had our own types of revolution. Wales was one of the first countries to be transformed by the Industrial Revolution. So we had the development of the coal mines, the ironworks, the slate mines. And so in a very short space of time, maybe just over a decade, at the beginning of the 19th century, the country was completely transformed by the Industrial Revolution and by a religious revolution. We had a Methodist revival which transformed people's lives, bringing in literacy, textual engagement in a way that had never been seen before. So the whole society was transformed in the early 1900s by these revolutions. And this is what I tried to write about in my most recent novel, where the main character, a very poor young girl, illiterate, with no hope for the future. She's born in 1789, in the year of the French Revolution, and in the novel, and I think the novel is very privileged in being able to deal with these forces. In this novel, I try to show how this little girl's life was transformed in a period of 10 years from having really very little hope for the future to being in touch with modernity. So even in a small peripheral culture, I think, we can still talk about power and revolution and the European imagination as well.
Thank you. Still on the topic of revolutions, when we were preparing for the session, Lukas brought up a really important topic, which is that, yes, there have been revolutions, but some have failed or raised expectations that weren't met and disappointed us. And at the same time, these situations, I suppose, are also experiments. They may be failed experiments. Are there any such failed experiments that we could revisit and maybe see if they could help us heal the divisions in our societies that we are experiencing now? What do you think?
About if there were any failed revolutions that we can kind of learn from and sort of use the experience to...
Yeah, as I said, we have a Velvet Revolution 37 years ago, and from this side of view, from 2026, it looks like it has failed. But it was a very hopeful time in that 1989, and 90s were great, but there was also a lot of problems. But there is another issue now, because before Velvet Revolution, maybe 90% of our population in Slovakia were against government, were against dictatorship. But now we have a new troubles, maybe very similar. We are getting to the dictatorship slowly, but there is maybe half of a population, maybe 50%, which are satisfied with this way to the dictatorship, which is very strange and terrifying and disappointing for me, because of course I'm living in a social bubble with great people from modern culture, and I have a nice life, but I can see the people who are outside this community. They are full of hatred, and they love to see us suffer, I have to say. So when government is fighting against culture, which is, unfortunately, I don't know why, because they have it in their blood maybe. So this, their voters, they are very happy that we are suffering now under this government. So it's a very strange time. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't explain it. But it's very terrifying. So maybe if is India prepared to offer me citizenship, I will take it. Of course, I'm joking.
I was actually thinking, as you were answering that question of going a bit rogue, and thinking about the idea of revolutions as something that you can interpret as parenthetical, ergo a failure or success more generally. Like, a revolution's not sort of ongoing, dynamic kind of things without end. I was thinking about, for example, the revolution in the West for kind of queer rights and parity in society, and that seemed to be something that was won at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st, but now again with these regressive currents, it's kind of being reeled back. So that's obviously a negative view, but also, can we not kind of think, even from failed revolutions in a more positive sense, that there is hope that it's not something that you can kind of close off? Because, we as humans, like, as long as sort of generations keep reproducing themselves and there's a sort of dynamism in ideas and, I suppose what I'm trying to say is, could we maybe learn that failure is a bit of a red herring and actually something can seem failed, but it's actually just dormant in both ways, both negatively and positively. So
I suppose it's very tempting for us to feel today that revolution can't be possible anymore. We often feel helpless in the face of these grand forces that are dominating our lives. Language used by the powerful, people being made quiet by the language of the powerful people. I suppose revolution means a radical change in the relations of power, doesn't it? And I think why these festivals are important is that they draw attention to the fact that language is a battleground. And we need to use language to the benefit of the revolution we want to see, and I think that's why literature is important. That's why keeping on writing, talking, discussing, that's why these events are so important, because we need to focus on the way language is being used, how language is being abused. And I was saying earlier, I think the novel in particular is a very potent means of drawing attention to these things. The novel can incorporate different types of language, even different languages. And yes, I think reading, writing, discussing language, these are the things that we are privileged to do here. And I think these are the types of things that can keep the possibility of revolution going.
Can I just say something quickly? I was just thinking what you said about the novel as a kind of vehicle for revolution. And I think, it really, I think we're going to go on to discuss the kind of potential and limitations of the novel as a revolutionary form. But I think within its complexity, that's kind of what makes it so well suited to kind of propagate ideas and radical change. And the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was how the novel is the sort of superlative vehicle for empathy. I feel that when you're reading fiction, it's sort of the only opportunity that we as humans have to kind of really, truly transcend our own ego. I know I sound a bit woo-woo, and to almost kind of astrally project into the interiority of others, because of free and direct style and just because of the nature of being able to kind of communicate the interiority of someone, which I don't think, maybe the other panelists won't agree with me, you really get in any other kind of art form. I mean, you do, but not to the same extent. I was just thinking a lot about kind of empathy as a necessary tool in revolutionary progress, and how consequently the novel is sort of like the ultimate machine for that, I suppose.
So, Angharad, you seem to believe that writing literature can give voice, can give actually power to different views, different perspectives, different lives. But do we really think that literature can resist power? As you pointed out, you asked that question, Lukas. Can literature resist power? Can it speak truth to power, as we say?
I completely think that literature can interrogate power, interpret power, critique power. Literature can draw our attention to who has power at this moment, who doesn't have power, who seeks power, why are they seeking power, what is power doing to people's minds or people's imaginations, as I said earlier, what is lack of power doing to those things. And I think literature, especially and the arts in general, can draw attention to these things and foreground them, and find forms, discover new forms all the time where these matters, these dialectics can come to be and be persuasive for readers. Of course, whether writers can resist power or change power or cause revolutions, I'm not so sure. I think that's up to the readers.
Maybe I am more skeptical, and I will tell why. And of course, I can see it from perspective of Slovakia, not the world or some better country. Because what is the problem is that there are not so many readers there. So how can literature make some revolution when the readers, the readers, there's people who already know where the problem is. So they don't need to be educated by us and to create some revolution. But maybe, for example, last summer I was working on a new novel which will be reflected on the situation in Slovakia, and it's like a very dark dystopic novel. And I was creating the story with my friend who is a painter, and we will show this dystopic situation through the character of a painter. And in that story, the revolution is rising. But for example, our resistance in Slovakia now against our government is very calm. It's very quiet. It's a soft power. And in that book, there will be no soft power because they are laughing on our soft power. They are literally laughing at us. When we protest or when we sign some petitions, they are just laughing in their ivory tower. So in that book, it will be another story. But I don't want to create some violent revolution, of course. But I can play when I write, and I love to play when I write. So
yeah, no, well, I do think exactly what you said. That is the problem: is who is the audience of the novel in 2025? It's also in the Northern European context, anyway, it's becoming an increasingly bourgeois form, I think. I was, a few weeks ago, I was reading Angharad's novel, The Life of Rebecca Jones. And I came across a really interesting point in the afterword, which really struck me, which was that Rebecca Jones, the main character, is she's from a rural farming community. She doesn't have much in the way of kind of cosmopolitan international education, and yet she's an extremely erudite protagonist. And that was because in the Welsh context throughout the 20th century, there was this kind of expectation of erudition that transcended kind of traditional elitist class boundaries. So in another context, you look at in the mining valleys in South Wales, where the people there were, working class, but they had Karl Marx reading groups and amateur opera societies. And there was also a lot of support from the welfare state that was kind of giving so much kind of culture, so much opportunity, so much intellectual opportunity to everyone. And it wasn't seen as strange that someone who had grown up on a farm would be well acquainted with, I don't know, the work of Georges Sand or, French literature. Or there was this kind of, this real embracing of even if you were living in a small place or coming from a certain milieu, of this potential to access the world of ideas through reading. And I think that's what is kind of our challenge as writers, is to resist this embourgeoisement of our form, which is obviously difficult. I'm kind of speaking, where does this begin? Is our kind of revolutionary purpose as novelists to do that, to bring back the novel, make it an accessible thing again, without kind of kowtowing to sort of forces that want to simplify it, or, it's complicated. It's a long revolution ahead.
Yes, I totally agree with Francesca. And of course, the important people we're missing out here are the translators and the interpreters who transfer these writings from country to country, from culture to culture, making revolution in a truly universal sense, possible. I was talking earlier about the international writers or European writers that inspired me. Much of that reading has been done in translation. And of course, we all know that in war situations or in conflict situations, some of the people who are most at risk are the interpreters and the translators, because they are seen to be bridging between two sides. They're bringing people together. They're making the sharing of ideas possible. So, yes, we can celebrate the power of writing, of reading, in a revolutionary sense, or in the cause of change, but also let us not forget the crucial role played by translators and interpreters. So just to join up with what Francesca was saying, she was talking about my novel, The Life of Rebecca Jones. And this has been translated into Bengali. And when the translator told me that he wanted to translate this novel, which is so rooted in a small rural community in Wales, in the middle of nowhere, if you like. And I said, why do Bengali readers want to read about this? And he said, because it's relevant. One theme of the novel is the tension between Welsh culture and the British Empire. And he said, through translation, Indian or Bengali readers will be able to identify and empathize with these characters or with the way these people are living in a battleground between cultures. So, yes, let us not forget the translators and the interpreters in revolutions.
Yes, thank you for making that point, because the translators and interpreters are often the unsung heroes, and they are the ones who, as you say, build bridges. And what we are facing now, with the general move to the right, unfortunately, and the divisions in society, is precisely the kind of closing of doors and turning kind of inward. So that's something that's happening across the world, and definitely you refer to this in your home country, Slovakia, but it's happening across Europe. So that takes us back to the notion of European imagination. Is that really something that we share, or is it just something we imagine we share? Tell me.
This idea of a European imagination is interesting because, again, coming from a Welsh culture, I've always thought of the European imagination as being a force of emancipation, as a release, as a liberty, away from Britishness and the Anglophone and the monolingual. So for me, it's been something I've wanted to identify with very much, especially after the disaster known as Brexit. However, speaking here now and speaking from different global perspectives, I realize that the European imagination can also feel like a closed door or a privilege that has caused oppression to other people. So I'm very aware of the duality of that concept. So it's certainly something that needs to be interrogated and nuanced very much. And I'm very aware of that speaking here today.
I'm not sure if European literature is it's too much imaginative. For me, it's more reflexive. They are trying to reflect everything they went through. For example, in compare with South America literature, that literature is very imaginative with their magic realism. I think Europeans, they are more into reflect their history, which is completely fine, of course. And if it is like the same in the Europe, I don't think so. Maybe some things, and maybe there are like a pair of countries, like of course Czech Republic and Slovakia. We have a lot of in common, and of course countries which was sadly influenced by Holocaust. They had a lot of in common, and of course they have their stories are influenced with these tragedies. So maybe in this way, but if you take some books from Finland and from Slovakia, they are completely different, and there is not so much common. So I think the European literature stands alone in every country, but there are groups of countries which has something in common.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's exactly as Angharad said. It's such a nuanced and potentially incendiary topic. I, like Angharad, growing up in a Welsh context, saw Europe as a form of emancipation away from the Anglo-Saxon sort of homogenized culture in which you grow up with in the British Isles. But I've been thinking a lot about regarding the rise of the right in, throughout the West. I've been thinking about the appropriation of some kind of ersatz European imagination. I was thinking about this horrifying speech that J.D. Vance made after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And he kind of evoked all this sort of ersatz, Greek, Roman, from the Greeks and the Romans to Mozart, and was sort of this idealized and completely farcical idea of Europe. So I think for us as European writers, it's important to acknowledge the toxic legacy of some kind of so-called Europe, but at the same time to embrace the positive side of it. It's such a pluralized continent full of completely sort of differing cultures and languages. And also, I think if we're talking revolutions, especially kind of leftist revolutions, to think about this sort of ersatz Europe that people like Vance want to appropriate is also an elitist Europe that most people in Europe may have benefited from because of the kind of horrible legacy of colonialism, but it's also something that they should try and move away from. We as Europeans should be liberating ourselves from this sort of toxic Europe. That we should be acknowledging it and talking about it and thinking about it continually and thinking about how we're implicated within it, but also we should have a responsibility to strive to kind of take the good parts of Europe and to make those the kind of major global force rather than this sort of horrifying racist, supremacist, and also just totally honky. J.D. Vance's speech sounded like some kind of ridiculous gladiator film with Russell Crowe in a toga, So yeah, in short, the European imagination as a topic is a fraught one that has the potential to be something wonderful and to be the beginning of solidarity and of beautiful cultural exchange and transmission. But we need to be really wary of how weighted, how heavy Europe is as a concept, I think.
Yes, thank you. And of course, we are aware of the fact that speaking about European imagination or Europe as such is another closing of doors, isn't it? It's we have been trying to look at the past and look at global literature from a different perspective in the past, I don't know, 10, 20 years. And it is in places like this, in forums like this, where we are reminded of sometimes being short-sighted. I think maybe this is now the time to open it up to the floor. I'm sure there are questions or comments.
He no longer can recognize the European cities. What he mentioned was to the massive Arab migration into West Europe and UK. And I just want to know, this includes London mayor is a Pakistani too. Do you consider this as a new kind of revolution in West Europe?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. I think the microphone's not... Do you want to borrow one of ours? Maybe.
Mr. Trump recently mentioned he no longer recognizes European cities. What he mentioned was the Arab migration into West Europe and UK. And this includes the mayor of London is a Pakistani too. Would you call this a new kind of revolution in West Europe and UK?
Sorry, so just to check, the sound's not great. Were you talking about migration in the UK and how the sort of the revolutionary nature? I mean, I hope I got this right, because as I said, the sound system wasn't great. But I think the revolutionary effect of migration in the UK has by and large been positive, I think. It's completely transformed British culture for the better. It's enriched it. It's like kind of burst open this, what was essentially, considering Britain was this great global power, the actual island itself was pretty parochial for most of history, whereas I think migration has actually genuinely opened the doors of the world. So in terms of revolutionary potential, yeah, it's had an enormous effect. I think at the same time, there has been this kind of appropriation, like the right in Britain, as in all of Northern Europe, have taken migration as some kind of bogeyman, some kind of excuse to begin and institute their kind of horrifying, not revolution, but regression, powered by sort of horrible sort of mainstream media, which has really kind of propagated a lot of these views, not mentioning any names, Rupert Murdoch. So yeah, I think that migration is 100, migration and diaspora are definitely a revolutionary force. I don't know, have either of you two got to add?
I'm not sure what was the question, but of course I heard the word migration, so I will hold to it. And of course our government is trying to scare their voters with migration, but nobody wants to go to Slovakia, to be true, except Ukrainians, because they are close, and it's for them it's a good option. And we can say that the stats are saying that Ukrainians are helping to our economy. So it's only good that they are there. Unfortunately, the circumstances, of course. But since I'm traveling, I can, and no matter where I am, I can say like any refugees can only improve our country, can only improve and can bring something new and something better, because we are not so big a nation. I'm sorry that I'm talking about Slovakia as in bad way. But yeah, I'm skeptical, and I love migration in a good way. I love the mixed cultures. I love cosmopolitan cities. When I was 14, I find myself in Ottawa, which is capital of Canada, and as a boy from Slovakia, for me it was like an absolutely amazing experience to see so many cultures in one beautiful city, and I think it influenced me for all my life.
Yes, I agree. I hope I understood the question. I don't think migration is a revolution because these people have no power. A revolution is a transference of power, and the people who are migrating have no power. It's the people in authority who want us to think that some kind of revolution is happening. And I think it's what it has unleashed is a reactionary force. These migrations have caused reactionary backlashes, which have been incredibly damaging and awful to be part of, actually. So, sad to say, I don't think the migrations are causing the revolutions that we want. Until those people have power, the world is not going to become a better place.
Thank you. I hope we can move to the next question.
I just get a feeling that your entire panel is overweight by the sheer weight of revolution. My point is that when we talk about the concept of the European entity, as it were, yeah, when you talk about the European entity, we know that all smaller nations would want a bigger identity that can to be cosseted. I mean, I know that Kundera, for example, fought hard to explain how Czechoslovakia was part of European culture. It's not Eastern Europe, and to be dismissed as such. Or Gunter Grass has a very nice term about the Kashubians, who are technically also white from Poland, who land up, and he said the Oscar's grandmother tells him, we Kashubians have strong heads. We're used to getting knocked.
in the head. So at one level, there is an element of anxiety of minorities and their cultures being kind of snuffed off. I agree with that. The other part is, I do not know, like you said about power, in the sense, given the asymmetry of power, what are the honest sense of chances of an revolution? You understand? You're talking about a 2% amount of voters, assuming we are still talking in democratic world, wanting to upturn something like the rest of the 100%. Presumably, about 40% of conscientious lot will be with you. Even then, I don't see realistically this being a revolution kind of level of. What I'm trying to say is the scope is too grand. What you are doing is at one level, some point of the smaller cultures being dismissed happens in Amazonian forests or in India. We have a lot of languages disappearing. Is the question too long? Should I shut up?
Just tell us what is the question, and we will answer.
The question is, how is it? I mean, is the story about a fight for identity of smaller people, and how is it connected to revolution? My problem was that, in the sense, you are trying to transmit a message to a bigger whole. I understand that part. But are you trying to upturn the bigger whole? I mean, I don't think that's what came through in my talk, in your talk. That's what I suggest. I understood. Would that be correct?
If I understood, we have the words. We have the words to bring awareness of things, but you're asking whether that's enough, really, aren't you, in a way, to cause a revolution? And that's a big question. I have no idea how to answer that. As a writer, I feel that words is what I have. I have a vote. I have my physical presence. But, you know, we need to come together, and I don't know how to respond. Where there's life, there's hope, and every revolution has to start somewhere. And without books and communication, then, you know, we have nothing. And it is very easy these days, in the days of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, to feel that we don't have any power at all. And I think that's deadly. So let us not give in to despair and disillusionment and use our words.
Since we're talking about power, don't you think the fact that P5 countries in the UN have almost always used their veto power to reject or block resolutions from the United Nations Security Council, and the fact that veto power has not been changed since 1945, wouldn't you agree that this is an abuse of international power and maybe a global dictatorship?
So sorry if I'm right. The question was essentially, have the kind of powerful nations been abusing that power in blocking revolutions? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you only have to look at the actions of the United States throughout the 20th century. They were continually kind of, you know, look at Chile, like Pinochet was essentially put there by the US, or you look at, you know, obviously a very divisive topic at the moment, but you look at is the plight of Palestinians on how Israel are occupying their land. You know, that they're often the sort of US-Israeli relation. You know, Israel couldn't exist without the support of the US. I think all the kind of big Western nations are have been continually throughout the 20th century been blocking revolutions. But the thing that's been really disturbing is there's been this kind of facade in the years after the Second World War of the establishment has been fighting for justice and fighting for equality, whilst all the while these kind of underhand, deeply sinister things have been happening on a global scale. There's been this kind of, I have this thing that I talk about with my friends sometimes, that Europe and the West generally kind of delegated and moved away evil. So they put it far away and they behave evilly far away without having to kind of like really face the sort of, we live in a world in which like atrocities are still being perpetrated endlessly, mostly by Western, I mean, not mostly, but. So yeah, in short, absolutely, I think the power in the world, and I've been talking about the West because obviously I'm coming from Western context, but it's the same globally. The powerful forces are endlessly, in very kind of underhand, sinister ways that are often not visible to most people, constantly thwarting revolution, which is why literature, although it can seem hopeless, is a kind of embryonic, it has some sort of embryonic potential to bring about change, because it's kind of got democratic potential because nobody can take away your thoughts and your words. I mean, maybe I'm being naive. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think we have no time. But I think revolution is only possible if there are enough people who wants the revolution. Because if we in Slovakia we are only small like community who would like to have some open-minded revolution, but we are against the most of the country. So it's very naive to think that we will change something. But when we have a protest, I'm going to the protest, despite I know it will change nothing, because it's my right, and I will vote and go into the protest and sign these petitions, despite I know that it will change nothing.
I think we need to close this session, and it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for your questions, and those who wanted to ask a question maybe can talk to the writers later, and it's really wonderful to be here. This is the kind of space we need. We don't always agree with each other, but we need to have a dialogue, and it's festivals like this, it's forums like this that make it possible.